"Don't open that briefcase, officer." Chief Danielle Brooks said it quietly, but something in her voice should have made Ryan Mercer stop. It didn't. The white patrol officer stood beneath the flashing red and blue lights with one hand resting on the brass latch of a worn brown leather briefcase, wearing the confident half-smile of a man who believed he had finally found what he was looking for. 20 feet away, Danielle stood beside her dark SUV, composed and motionless, watching him search through luggage that had been neatly packed less than an hour earlier. The highway shoulder shimmered beneath a thin layer of rain, headlights sliding past in the darkness, each passing car disappearing before anyone inside could understand what was happening. Mercer glanced toward Danielle. "Something in here you don't want me to see?" he asked. Danielle held his gaze. She had answered his questions. She had followed every instruction. She had remained calm from the moment his patrol lights appeared behind her. Yet somewhere along the way, a routine traffic stop had become something else. Mercer had searched one suitcase, then another, apparently convinced that if he kept looking long enough, he would eventually discover something that justified the suspicion he had carried from the moment he approached her window. Now only the brown briefcase remained. Officer Kevin Walsh stood several feet behind Mercer, his expression tightening. He had arrived as backup only minutes earlier, but even he seemed uncertain about where this encounter was going. "Ryan," Walsh said carefully, "maybe we should slow this down." Mercer ignored him. His attention remained fixed on Danielle. Imagine standing on the shoulder of an American highway at night while a stranger wearing a badge searches through your belongings, convinced he understands who you are before he has even bothered to learn your name. Imagine knowing that one sentence could change his entire expression, yet choosing not to say it because you need to know something more important. How far will he go when he believes you are nobody? Danielle knew exactly what her title could do. She also knew what it shouldn't have to do. Respect should not require rank. Dignity should not depend on a badge hidden inside a briefcase. Mercer tapped the leather case with 2 fingers. "Last chance," he said. "Anything you'd like to tell me?" Danielle's eyes moved briefly toward his body camera, then back to his face. "I've already told you what you need to know." That answer seemed to irritate him. He pulled the briefcase closer. The leather was dark brown, softened at the corners by years of use. There was nothing dramatic about it. No warning label. No official seal visible from the outside. Just 2 brass latches and a handle polished smooth by time. Yet Danielle's calm had changed the instant he touched it, and Mercer noticed. He mistook caution for fear. That mistake was about to matter. Walsh stepped forward. "Mercer." This time his voice carried more urgency. Mercer placed his thumb beneath the first latch. Click. Danielle didn't move. The second latch followed. Click. The sounds were tiny against the traffic rushing behind them, but for Danielle, they seemed impossibly loud. Mercer looked up one final time, expecting nervousness. Instead, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Not fear. Not panic. Authority. Quiet, practiced authority. For the first time that night, his smile weakened. Then he lifted the lid. His eyes dropped to what was inside, and the color slowly drained from his face. 27 minutes earlier, Danielle Brooks had been driving north through the quiet outskirts of Richmond, Virginia, with the steady rhythm of windshield wipers marking time against a light evening rain. The dashboard clock read 9:43. Traffic had thinned to scattered headlights, and the wet pavement reflected every roadside lamp in long ribbons of gold. Danielle had spent most of the day in meetings, the kind that demanded patience, careful listening, and an ability to recognize what people avoided saying. At 42, she had learned that silence could reveal more than conversation. She drove without rushing, both hands relaxed on the steering wheel, a cup of coffee cooling untouched in the center console. Behind her sat 2 pieces of ordinary luggage and 1 brown leather briefcase. The briefcase had been with her for years, long enough for the corners to soften and the handle to carry the faint marks of constant use. Tonight, however, what rested inside it was anything but ordinary. Danielle glanced at the rearview mirror when headlights appeared several car lengths behind her. At first she thought nothing of them. Then the vehicle moved closer. A patrol car. She checked her speed. 44 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. Her seat belt was secured. Her registration was current. Nothing seemed unusual. Still, the patrol car remained behind her through one intersection, then another. Danielle felt the familiar tightening of awareness that came not from fear, but experience. She knew police procedure better than almost anyone who might stop her. She also knew that knowing the rules did not guarantee that everyone would follow them. 30 seconds later, red and blue lights burst across her mirrors. Danielle exhaled once and signaled immediately. She guided the SUV onto a wide shoulder beneath a streetlight, shifted into park, lowered the window, and placed both hands where they could easily be seen. The patrol car stopped roughly 15 feet behind her. For several seconds, nobody emerged. Danielle watched through the mirror as the officer appeared to be checking information on his computer. Then the driver's door opened. Officer Ryan Mercer stepped into the rain. He adjusted his jacket and approached slowly, flashlight already in hand despite the streetlight above them. Danielle noticed the details automatically. His posture, his pace, the position of his hands, the way he looked through the rear passenger window before reaching her door. License and registration, Mercer said. No greeting, no explanation. Danielle remained courteous. Certainly, officer. May I ask why you stopped me? Mercer aimed the flashlight briefly toward the interior before answering. License and registration first. Danielle told him exactly where her wallet was before reaching for it. She handed over her driver's license and registration. Mercer studied the license longer than necessary, then looked at her, then back at the card. This your vehicle? Yes. Where are you coming from tonight? Danielle paused. It was not the question itself that concerned her. It was the progression. A meeting downtown. Mercer looked toward the rear of the SUV. What kind of meeting? Danielle's expression remained neutral. Officer, was there a traffic violation? A small silence followed. Rain tapped against the roof. Mercer shifted his weight. I asked you a question. Danielle looked directly at him. Calm. Controlled. And I am asking why I was stopped. Something changed in Mercer's face, subtle but unmistakable. The conversation was no longer about driving. He glanced again toward the luggage behind her, and Danielle understood that he had begun constructing a story about her before he knew a single true thing about who she was. Mercer kept Danielle's license between two fingers as he studied her through the open window. You ask a lot of questions, he said. Danielle heard the judgment beneath the words, but her expression did not change. Years in command had taught her that authority revealed itself most clearly when challenged by calm. I asked one question, she replied. Why was I stopped? Mercer glanced toward the rear of the vehicle again. There was a report of suspicious activity in this area tonight. What kind of suspicious activity? I will ask the questions. Danielle held his gaze for a moment, then looked forward through the windshield. Rain traced thin streams across the glass. She knew how easily a roadside conversation could become a contest of pride when an officer stopped listening and started trying to win. She had trained younger officers against exactly that instinct. Mercer stepped slightly closer to the window. You said you were coming from a meeting. Where was it? Downtown Richmond. With who? Danielle turned toward him. Is that related to the reason you stopped me? His jaw tightened. He looked down at her license again. Danielle Brooks. He said her name slowly, as though testing whether it belonged to the woman sitting before him. What do you do, Miss Brooks? Danielle noticed he had not recognized the name. That alone told her something. She had taken command only recently, and her formal introduction to several patrol divisions was scheduled for the following week. Her appointment had circulated through department channels, but not every officer paid attention to administrative announcements. Mercer clearly had not. I work in public service, she said. Mercer gave a short, humorless laugh. That could mean anything. It could. His flashlight moved across the back seat again. 2 travel bags were visible behind the tinted glass. You traveling somewhere? No. Then why all the luggage? Personal belongings. Mercer stared at her for another second. Each answer seemed to frustrate him because none gave him what he wanted. Danielle could almost see the assumptions arranging themselves behind his eyes. Expensive vehicle. Black woman. Late evening. Luggage. Questions instead of nervous compliance. Separate facts were being forced into a story that existed only because Mercer wanted them to fit. Step out of the vehicle for me, he said. Danielle remained still. For what purpose? Because I am instructing you to step out. There it was again. Not explanation. Control. Danielle slowly unfastened her seatbelt. I am going to open the door now. Mercer stepped back. She exited carefully and stood beneath the streetlight as rain settled across the shoulders of her dark coat. At 5 feet 7 inches, Danielle was shorter than Mercer, yet nothing about her posture suggested intimidation. She closed the door gently. Mercer watched her with growing irritation. "Stand near the front of the vehicle." Danielle complied. A truck passed in the nearest lane, sending a low rush of water across the pavement. For one strange second, Danielle thought about how ordinary she must look to anyone driving past. Just another black woman standing beside an officer on a wet Virginia highway. Nobody would know she had spent more than 20 years serving communities like this one. Nobody would know how many officers she had trained, promoted, disciplined, or defended. Nobody would know that the department Mercer represented now answered to her. And Danielle decided not to tell him. Not yet. Because a question had begun forming in her mind, one more important than Mercer's opinion of her. What would this officer do if he believed the woman standing in front of him had no title, no influence, and no one powerful waiting to protect her? Mercer looked toward the rear cargo area once more. "I want to take a look at those bags." Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" Mercer rested one hand near the back of the SUV. "Because something about this situation does not add up." Danielle looked at him steadily. "Officer Mercer, the only thing that has changed since you stopped me is the story you have decided to tell yourself." For the first time since the stop began, Mercer looked genuinely offended, as if Danielle's calm observation had crossed some invisible line. "You might want to watch your attitude," he said. Danielle stood beneath the streetlight with rain gathering along the collar of her coat. "My attitude is not evidence of a crime." Mercer stared at her, then turned toward the rear of the SUV. "Open the cargo area." Danielle did not move. "Are you asking for my consent to search my belongings?" The question landed differently than Mercer expected. He looked back at her. "If you have nothing to hide, this should not be a problem." Danielle had heard that sentence before. She had heard versions of it in complaints, body camera reviews, training rooms, disciplinary hearings, and conversations with citizens who believed they had been treated like suspects before anyone established a reason. "Having nothing to hide does not make every search reasonable," she said. Mercer gave a thin smile. "You really do like telling police officers how to do their jobs." Danielle almost answered, but headlights appeared behind the patrol car. A second cruiser pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. Officer Kevin Walsh emerged moments later, fastening his rain jacket as he approached. He was younger than Mercer, perhaps 29, with the alert expression of someone trying to understand a situation before choosing a side. "Everything good?" Walsh asked. Mercer answered immediately. "Possible suspicious vehicle. Driver is being difficult." Walsh looked toward Danielle. She stood quietly near the front of her SUV, hands visible, expression controlled. Nothing about the scene matched the urgency in Mercer's description. "What was the original stop?" Walsh asked. Mercer hesitated just long enough for Danielle to notice. "Vehicle caught my attention near the commercial district." "For what violation?" Walsh asked. Another silence. Mercer looked irritated. "I am still figuring out what we have." Danielle watched Walsh absorb that answer. His eyes shifted toward Mercer's body camera, then toward the SUV. "Did dispatch connect the vehicle to anything?" "Not yet." Mercer turned away as though the question itself were unnecessary. He walked toward the rear hatch. "But look at all this stuff." Danielle felt something colder than the rain settle over the moment. 2 bags. A coat. A brown briefcase. Ordinary belongings had somehow become suspicious because Mercer needed them to be. Imagine how quickly dignity can become conditional when someone with authority decides your explanation is less believable than their assumption. Danielle knew she could end the uncertainty with a name, a rank, perhaps one telephone call. Instead, she watched. Not because she enjoyed the humiliation. Not because she wanted Mercer to fail. She watched because every second revealed something a formal interview never could. Walsh moved closer to Mercer and lowered his voice. "Ryan, if there is no violation and no connection from dispatch, maybe we should finish the stop." Mercer looked toward Danielle and saw that she had heard him. Pride hardened his expression. "I know what I am doing." He returned to the driver's side and held out her license. But when Danielle reached for it, he pulled his hand back slightly. "Open the rear hatch." Danielle's eyes settled on his. "Are you ordering me to open it?" Mercer paused. Rain clicked softly against the patrol cars. Walsh said nothing. Danielle waited. Finally, Mercer spoke. "I have reasonable concerns about what you are transporting." "Based on what?" she asked. Mercer looked through the tinted rear window. "Based on the circumstances." Danielle followed his gaze. Behind that glass sat the brown leather briefcase, invisible beneath the dim interior shadows. She knew what it contained. She knew one particular name buried inside those files. And as Mercer stepped toward the back of her vehicle, completely unaware of how close he was getting to his own secret, Danielle understood that this traffic stop was no longer simply revealing what he thought about her. It was beginning to reveal what he feared someone might discover about him. Mercer stopped beside the rear hatch and looked at Danielle as if waiting for her resistance to prove something. She gave him none. The rain had softened into a mist, leaving the highway shoulder glossy beneath the red and blue lights. Walsh remained a few feet away, watching with growing concern. "Open it," Mercer said. Danielle's voice stayed level. "I want it clearly recorded that I have asked for the legal basis of this search." Mercer glanced at his body camera. "And I have told you I have concerns. Concerns are not the same as facts." His expression tightened. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mercer told Danielle to unlock the vehicle. She did so without argument, not because she agreed with his reasoning, but because she understood that every word, every instruction, and every decision was being preserved. The hatch rose slowly. Inside were 2 travel bags, a folded raincoat, a small overnight case, and several ordinary personal items arranged with almost deliberate neatness. Mercer immediately reached for the first bag. Danielle watched him inspect it. Clothing, toiletries, a paperback novel. Nothing unusual. He moved to the second. A pair of shoes, a sweater, a sealed folder containing routine conference materials. Again, nothing. Walsh shifted his weight. "Ryan, there is nothing here." Mercer ignored him. The absence of anything suspicious should have ended the search. Instead, it seemed to deepen his determination. Danielle recognized the pattern immediately. Mercer was no longer investigating a reasonable concern. He was defending his original assumption. Every harmless object became another challenge to his judgment, and every empty pocket seemed to make him more certain that something must be hidden somewhere else. "What exactly are you expecting to find?" Danielle asked. Mercer continued looking through the cargo area. "People who have something to hide usually hope officers get tired of looking." Danielle studied him. "And officers who decide someone is guilty usually keep looking until ordinary things start appearing suspicious." Walsh turned toward her, surprised by how calmly she said it. Mercer straightened. "You think you know a lot about police work. Enough to know when questions stop being questions." The words hung between them. Mercer looked away first. He moved the folded raincoat, and that was when he saw it. The brown leather briefcase rested flat near the back of the cargo area, partially concealed beneath a narrow document pouch. It was older than everything around it, its corners worn smooth and its brass hardware dulled by years of use. Mercer reached toward it. Danielle's expression changed for the first time. Barely. A tightening around the eyes. A slower breath. But Mercer noticed. "What is this?" he asked. "A briefcase." "I can see that." He pulled it toward him. "What is inside?" Danielle looked at the case, then at Mercer. "Documents that have nothing to do with this stop." Mercer smiled faintly, convinced he had finally discovered the reason for her composure. Walsh stepped closer. "Maybe leave that one alone." Mercer turned. "Why?" "Because we still do not have anything connecting her to a crime." Mercer looked back at Danielle. "Then she should have no problem telling me what is inside." Danielle's voice became quieter. "Officer Mercer, put the case back." Something about the way she said his name made Walsh glance sharply toward her. It was not a request spoken from fear. It sounded almost like an instruction from someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mercer heard it too, but pride translated authority into defiance. "Now I definitely want to know." Danielle stared at him. She knew what rested beneath those brass latches. Credentials, confidential reports, internal complaints, dates, witness statements, and one file she had reviewed less than 3 hours earlier. A file bearing the name Ryan Mercer. She could stop this with 5 words. She could tell him who she was. Instead, she remained silent. Mercer placed his hand on the first latch, unaware that the object he believed might expose Danielle was about to expose him. Danielle watched Mercer's hand rest on the brass latch, and for a moment the highway seemed strangely quiet despite the steady movement of traffic beyond them. She knew she could end this immediately, for words would probably be enough. "I am your chief." Mercer would step back. His tone would change. The suspicion would disappear beneath apologies and explanations. But that was exactly why Danielle said nothing. For more than 20 years, she had served in law enforcement, beginning as a patrol officer on streets where people remembered not only what officers said, but how they made them feel. She had worked investigations, supervised night shifts, reviewed complaints, trained recruits, and eventually earned command positions that once seemed impossibly distant. Through every promotion, Danielle had carried one belief with her: a badge did not create character. It revealed it. Give someone authority, then watch what they did when they believed nobody important was watching. That lesson had followed her into the meeting she attended earlier that evening. For nearly 3 months, a quiet internal review had been examining a pattern of questionable traffic stops across several patrol zones. The complaints did not all sound identical, but Danielle had noticed a troubling similarity. Drivers described routine encounters that became prolonged searches. Questions expanded without clear reasons. Explanations seemed to matter less once an officer formed an early suspicion. Several complainants were black motorists who said they felt judged before they were heard. No single report told the entire story. Together, they demanded attention. Danielle had insisted on reviewing the records personally before deciding what action the department should take. That was why the brown briefcase was in her vehicle. Inside were copies of reports prepared for a confidential command meeting the following morning. Names, dates, traffic stop summaries, supervisory notes, body camera review requests. Nothing dramatic by itself. But together, the documents formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. And among those pages appeared the same name more than once: Officer Ryan Mercer. Danielle had recognized him almost immediately after reading the nameplate on his uniform. She had not expected to meet him tonight. She certainly had not expected to become part of the very pattern she was reviewing. Yet as the stop unfolded, each decision Mercer made seemed to echo language she had read only hours earlier. The unnecessary questions, the vague justification, the growing determination to find something after finding nothing. Danielle felt no satisfaction in that realization. If anything, it disappointed her. She wanted complaints to be misunderstandings. She wanted reviews to show that procedures had been followed. A police chief did not win when an officer failed. The entire department lost something. Walsh looked between them. Ryan, I really think we should stop here. Mercer kept his hand on the case. She reacted the second I touched this. That does not make it evidence, Walsh replied. Danielle studied the younger officer. He was doing what good judgment required, asking whether their authority had a legitimate purpose. Mercer, however, seemed unable to separate caution from guilt. Miss Brooks, he said, what are you so worried about me seeing? Danielle almost smiled, but there was no humor in her eyes. I am not worried about what you will see. Mercer frowned. Then what? She looked directly at his body camera. I am wondering what you will do after you see it. The confidence in his face flickered, only for a second. Then pride returned. He placed his thumb beneath the latch. Danielle understood that the moment had become bigger than her title. If Mercer changed his behavior only after discovering she was powerful, then he had learned nothing about why his behavior was wrong. So she gave him one final opportunity to make the right decision without knowing who stood before him. Officer Mercer, she said quietly, think carefully about what you are doing. He looked at her, then at the case. His thumb pressed upward. The first latch released with a small metallic click. The second latch opened with another quiet click. Mercer paused, perhaps expecting Danielle to object again, but she remained beside the SUV with the same composed expression. Walsh watched from several feet away, his attention moving between the briefcase and Danielle, as though he had finally realized there was something about this woman neither officer understood. Mercer lifted the lid. For 1 second, nothing changed. Then his eyes stopped moving. Resting neatly on top of the documents was a leather credential holder bearing an official badge. Mercer stared at it. He leaned closer, reading the identification beside it. Danielle Brooks, Chief of Police. The confidence drained from his face so quickly that Walsh noticed before he even saw the credentials. What is it? Walsh asked. Mercer did not answer. Walsh stepped closer, looked into the case, and froze. His eyes lifted toward Danielle. Chief Brooks. The words seemed to change the air around them. Mercer looked from the credentials to Danielle and back again, struggling to reconcile the woman he had questioned on the roadside with the authority represented inside that case. You are the chief? He asked. Danielle's expression remained steady. I was the chief when you approached my window. I was the chief when you questioned whether this vehicle belonged to me. And I was the chief before you opened that case. Mercer opened his mouth, but no explanation came. Then the radio on Walsh's shoulder broke the silence. Dispatch was requesting confirmation on Chief Brooks's location after Captain Rebecca Hayes had been unable to reach her regarding the morning command briefing. Walsh answered slowly, never taking his eyes off Danielle. Dispatch, Chief Brooks is here with us. A pause followed. Then Captain Hayes's voice came through asking for their exact location. Mercer swallowed. Chief, I did not know. Danielle looked at him for several seconds. That is the problem, Officer Mercer. You should not have needed to know. The sentence landed harder than anger could have. Mercer looked down at the open briefcase again, perhaps searching for somewhere else to place his attention. That was when he noticed the folder beneath Danielle's credentials. A white label ran across its upper edge. Internal Professional Standards Review. Mercer became still. Danielle saw his eyes move down the page. There were several names listed on the cover sheet. His was one of them. Ryan Mercer. Suddenly the traffic stop looked different even to him. The questions. The luggage. The vague suspicion. The refusal to stop after finding nothing. Every choice he had made was now unfolding in front of the person responsible for reviewing a pattern of nearly identical complaints. Mercer reached toward the folder without thinking. Danielle's voice stopped him. Do not touch that file. This time he obeyed immediately. Walsh looked at Mercer, then at the documents. Ryan, your name is on there. Mercer said nothing. His earlier certainty had vanished, replaced by the realization that the briefcase contained more than proof of Danielle's rank. It contained a record of questions already being asked about him. Danielle stepped closer, still calm. Those documents were prepared before tonight. Your name was already under review. Mercer looked up quickly. Chief, I can explain this stop. You will have that opportunity. Danielle glanced toward his body camera. And fortunately, I will not have to rely only on your explanation. Headlights appeared behind them. Another department vehicle approached and pulled onto the shoulder. Captain Rebecca Hayes stepped out and walked toward the scene. Mercer watched her coming, then looked once more into the open case. Minutes earlier, he had believed opening it would prove Danielle had something to hide. Instead, it had revealed her badge, his name, and a truth he could no longer avoid. This was not the beginning of an investigation into Danielle Brooks. It was becoming evidence in the investigation of Ryan Mercer. Captain Rebecca Hayes approached through the mist with measured steps, taking in the scene before anyone spoke. Danielle beside the SUV. Walsh near the open cargo area. Mercer standing in front of the brown briefcase with an expression Hayes had rarely seen on him before. Uncertainty. Chief Brooks, Hayes said, stopping beside Danielle. Are you all right? I am fine, Captain. Danielle's answer was calm. Before we discuss anything else, preserve every recording connected to this stop. Both body cameras, both patrol vehicle cameras, dispatch audio, computer activity, and the original reason entered for the stop. Hayes immediately understood the significance of the request. Yes, Chief. Mercer stepped forward slightly. Captain, I can explain what happened. Hayes looked at him. You will get that opportunity through the proper process. Mercer glanced toward Danielle. Chief, I honestly did not know who you were. Danielle's face remained unreadable. You keep saying that as though it helps you. Mercer fell silent. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving only droplets falling from nearby trees and the low hiss of tires passing on wet pavement. Danielle looked toward the open briefcase. Her badge remained visible above the confidential files. Less than 10 minutes earlier, Mercer had treated that case as proof that she must be hiding something. Now he seemed unable to look at it. Hayes asked Walsh to describe what he had observed after arriving. Walsh hesitated, not because he was uncertain, but because he understood the weight of speaking honestly about another officer. When I arrived, Chief Brooks was already outside the vehicle, he said. I asked Officer Mercer about the original violation. I did not hear a specific traffic offense. Dispatch had not connected the vehicle to a reported crime. I suggested ending the stop more than once. Mercer looked at him. Kevin. Walsh met his eyes. I have to tell her what happened. Danielle listened without interrupting. She did not need loyalty to herself. She needed loyalty to the truth. Hayes then asked Mercer to turn over responsibility for the stop and step away from the vehicle while the circumstances were documented. Mercer slowly removed his department badge from its holder and looked at it for a long second before handing it to Hayes as part of the administrative process pending review. There was no shouting, no spectacle, just a small piece of metal passing from one hand to another beneath a Virginia streetlight. Yet the symbolism was impossible to miss. Mercer had relied on that badge all evening, as if authority alone could make every decision correct. Now the same department that issued it was asking whether he had honored what it represented. Danielle closed the briefcase herself. Click, click. The same two sounds Mercer had heard minutes earlier, but everything around them had changed. Hayes secured the case inside Danielle's SUV and confirmed that another supervisor was on the way to handle the scene independently. Danielle insisted on that detail. I am involved now, she said. I will not make the final determination about tonight. Mercer looked surprised. Perhaps he had expected immediate punishment. Perhaps he had expected the chief to use her position exactly as he had used his authority. Danielle would not. Accountability required evidence, procedure, and fairness, especially when emotions made shortcuts tempting. Chief, Mercer said quietly, I made a mistake. Danielle turned toward him. The review will determine exactly what happened. I am sorry. She studied him for a moment. Are you sorry because of how you treated me, Officer Mercer, or because you discovered who I am? Mercer had no answer. Walsh lowered his eyes. Hayes remained silent. Danielle looked down the wet highway, where strangers continued driving past without ever knowing what had happened on the shoulder. Then she turned back to Mercer. That is the question you need to answer before anyone talks about forgiveness. And for the first time that night, Mercer was no longer searching Danielle's belongings for evidence. He was being forced to search his own decisions. By 8:30 the next morning, the rain had cleared from Richmond, leaving the city beneath a pale blue sky that seemed almost too ordinary for what had changed overnight. Danielle Brooks stood inside the department briefing room while Captain Rebecca Hayes completed the transfer of recordings and reports to an independent professional standards team. Danielle had deliberately removed herself from the final decision. If accountability meant anything, it could not become personal simply because the person stopped on that highway happened to be the chief. The evidence would speak for itself. Mercer's body camera showed his questions. His patrol vehicle camera showed the duration of the stop. Dispatch records showed no confirmed report connecting Danielle's SUV to criminal activity. Walsh's camera captured his repeated concerns. And the earlier complaints inside Danielle's brown briefcase showed why one uncomfortable encounter could not be dismissed as an isolated misunderstanding. Mercer sat across the building with a union representative and an independent investigator, no longer protected by assumptions, but also not denied the fair process Danielle expected for everyone. That distinction mattered to her. Justice was not revenge wearing official paperwork. Justice was applying the same standard even when anger made exceptions feel satisfying. Later that morning, Mercer requested permission to speak with her briefly before the formal review continued. Hayes remained present. Mercer looked exhausted. Chief Brooks, he began, I owe you an apology. Danielle waited. I made assumptions, he continued. I kept looking for a reason to justify the stop after I should have stepped back. When I found out who you were, I realized how badly I had handled it. Danielle studied him. When you found out who I was? Mercer hesitated. The room became quiet. Danielle leaned forward slightly. That is what I want you to think about. If there had been no badge in that case, would you believe you handled it badly? Mercer looked down. I do not know. Then start there. He raised his eyes again. Danielle's voice remained calm. What if I had been a nurse coming home from a late shift? What if I had been a teacher carrying papers to grade? What if I had been a mother returning from visiting her daughter? What if I had simply been Danielle Brooks, a black woman driving home at night? Would I have deserved less patience because there was no title waiting in my luggage? Mercer said nothing. There was nothing useful he could say quickly, and Danielle did not rescue him from the silence. Some questions were supposed to remain uncomfortable long enough to change the person hearing them. In the weeks that followed, the department reviewed the earlier complaints alongside the evidence from Danielle's stop. Policies were examined, supervisors were questioned, and additional training was ordered across patrol divisions. Mercer faced an administrative process based on the documented record, not Danielle's anger. Walsh's decision to speak honestly was formally recognized, not because he had sided with the chief, but because he had questioned conduct when he believed something was wrong. Danielle also changed something deeper. At the next department-wide meeting, She placed the brown briefcase on the table beside the podium. She did not open it. She did not need to. Some of you know what happened on that highway, she said. But the lesson is not that an officer stopped the wrong woman. There should never be a right woman to treat without dignity. The room remained silent. Danielle looked across the faces before her. A citizen should not need to be your chief, your judge, your mayor, or someone with powerful connections before you decide their rights matter. The badge on your chest does not make another person's dignity smaller. Months later, Danielle still carried that same weathered briefcase. The brass latches still made the same quiet clicks. But whenever she heard them, she remembered a rainy highway and one question that mattered more than any title she would ever hold. What if I had not been the chief? Ryan Mercer thought he was searching a woman's luggage for the truth. What he found instead was a mirror, because sometimes justice does not arrive with noise. Sometimes it simply asks you to look at who you became when you thought the person in front of you had no power.